Today's scripture reading is from Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 19. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a stairway set up on earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land of which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And all families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first.
So Vern had a dream one night. He was in the Old West, riding in a stagecoach. Suddenly, a man riding a horse pulls up to the left side of the stagecoach, and a riderless horse pulls up on the right. The man leans down, pulls open the door, and jumps off his horse into the stagecoach. Then he opens the other door and jumps on the other horse. Now, just before he rode off, Vern yelled out, What was that all about? The man replied, Nothing. It's just a stage I'm going through. If you've been following along with the narrative of births, we've been hearing a lot about births this summer. Ishmael, Isaac, then twins Jacob and Esau last week. You would be correct that something has changed from that pattern, from what Tom read for us this morning. Now, because of the dynamics, as we heard, dynamics in the family of Isaac and Rebekah, there's been a rupture in the relationship between these two brothers. We understand something of why this might have been from the scene last week regarding Jacob maneuvering Esau into hastily selling him his birthright, giving Jacob now the privilege usually reserved for the eldest brother. Esau is officially the eldest, but now Jacob has that birthright. We also recognize that for the first time in several weeks, we're not reading about things taking place in a family setting. Jacob is here alone, which indicates that his scheming finally seems to have caught up with him. Of course, as we realized last week, there's blame squarely to go around. Father Isaac favored Esau, mother Rebekah favored Jacob, and Esau was all too quick to be led by the desire for immediate gratification, to care about the long-term consequences of giving up his birthright. So there's a little blame to be sprinkled all around here. But it is Jacob who pays a price here, and it is essentially exile, which is encouraged by his mother, Rebekah, so as to avoid the wrath of a very ticked-off Esau. It also becomes clear that Jacob is in wandering mode, heading back toward Haran, we hear this morning, from where his family once ventured en route to Canaan in the time of his grandfather Abraham. Jacob is heading away from his family, and his path just seems backwards. But then again, sometimes we need to go back from where we came in order to make sense of who we are and the place that we maybe ultimately need to be. It always has sounded absolutely awful to me how Jacob decided to sleep that night. He grabs a stone and puts it under his head and lays down. Not the kind of pillow I would want, but who am I to judge? Does not sound comfortable in the least, but that's what he had. As I'm starting to pity Jacob a bit, the text ventures into Jacob's dream world. And he dreamed that there was a stairway set up on the earth, the top of it reaching heaven, and the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Not to make too fine a point of it, but at this particular moment, it's evident that we are no longer in Kansas. Now God enters the dream, apparently standing beside Jacob and saying, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring, and to your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. And you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Now, before trying to interpret this dream, it is important to highlight the importance of place in all of this. Jacob chose that certain place, as the text says, to slumber for the night. This implies that either Jacob was very deliberate in his choice of that site, which I don't think was the case, or God was making sure that he was tired enough to compel him to stay right there. Again, not much of a hotel, and it doesn't sound like room service was that great, but it seemed to have some charm to Jacob and or God. In the ancient world, see, there was a belief in something that was called dream incubation. Many in the Bible we read about, and other places throughout the Mediterranean and Near East, felt strongly that if one wanted to have an experience of the divine, to have an encounter with God or the gods, they would select a specific location and go to sleep right there in that place. If one went to the temple and went to sleep, as an example, they could expect to have some kind of interaction with God. Now, whether or not Jacob was fully conscious of this, where he made the decision to turn in for the night meant that he put the odds in his favor that he was going to see God some way. And there he did see God in his dreams. In trying to make sense of the dream, the late Walter Brueggemann first describes the significance of what Jacob was perceiving. He writes, the wakeful world, when Jacob was awake, the wakeful world of Jacob was a world of fear, terror, loneliness, and we may imagine in Jacob's case, unresolved guilt. The dream permits the entry of an alternative into his life. The dream is not a morbid review of a shameful past. It is rather the presentation of an alternative future with God. The gospel, Brueggemann uses the term, the gospel, moves to Jacob in a time when his guard is down. The dream permits news. I don't know about you, but I kind of like this idea of a dream in which I receive alternative news to that which I usually take in. Just this week alone, on Tuesday, an event on Wednesday I had been looking forward to for some time got canceled because of extreme heat. And then more events got canceled Thursday and Friday because of the oppressive smoke from the Canadian wildfires. On top of that, we have to avoid lettuce and other produce because of this bizarre parasite that causes all kinds of distress and even puts people in the hospital. As a side note, try to be a vegetarian and stay away from lettuce, but won't go there. Not fun. And none of this takes into account the seeming uptick in violence in shopping areas and public places that have led to multiple injuries and even deaths in recent weeks. And that doesn't even mention anything going on anywhere overseas, Ukraine, Iran, Lebanon, the list can go on. The dream world, contrasted with the so-called real world, would be a welcome escape about right now. Brueggemann uses the term gospel for this news that comes to Jacob in his dream because gospel means good news. Good news that transcends all the stuff that weighs us down. The news, Brueggemann comments, is that there is traffic between heaven and earth. Earth is not left to its own resources, and heaven is not a remote, self-contained realm for the gods. Heaven has to do with earth, and earth finally may count on the resources of heaven. Or as I would boil this down to, heaven and earth touch. Heaven and earth are connected. There is some unity between heaven and earth, and that is the good news. The good news, Brueggemann proceeds to disclose, is the reality of promise related to the purposes of God. In this dream, the promise of God shatters the presumed world of Jacob. He had assumed he traveled alone, with his only purpose being survival. It was not hard then to conclude that God's reality was irrelevant. Now it is asserted that earth here is a place of possibility because it has not been and will not be cut off from the sustaining role of God. In other words, God cares about what happens here, and God cares about us. God has to communicate through the language of promise because it's almost impossible to grasp the truth of God's activity in the world amid warfare and gun violence and wildfires and bad lettuce and inclement weather and climate disruption. In Jacob's case, it took him leaving what was familiar, venturing into the wilderness, feeling alone. And there in that moment, in his vulnerability, God enters into Jacob's consciousness through a dream. The gospel, the good news that Jacob and all of us need to hear, is at least threefold. Beyond the already stated, and God, has said this before. This is not new information, but God's already stated, hey, Jacob, your family's going to get land and your generations are going to be blessed. But that's not all. That's the standard line. But now there are three more declarations. First, I am with you. Second, I will keep you wherever you go. Third, I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Brueggemann boils these three promises down to three words: accompaniment, protection, homecoming. For Jacob, these promises would have been like manna from heaven, knowing that God had not abandoned him, that God would preserve him and protect him as he moved about in unfamiliar places, and that God would ultimately bring him to where he needed to be, that he had a future, he had a place, he had a home. Because Jacob wasn't feeling much like he had a home at that particular point. How many of us need to hear this as loud voices try to tell us where we are and who we are and what defines what we can possibly be? I think it's increasingly dangerous to listen to all of the messages through which we might see ourselves as less than, as at the mercy of those who have power, as those who are disconnected somehow from any kind of blessing. Jacob's dream reminds us that God's reality is different from what we are told so often is truth. We're called to an awareness beyond what social media or the internet or even the newspapers and television want to compel us to perceive. There's something more. There is gospel. There is good news that God and heaven and angels are not far off and distant, but that we can access them in the here and now if we will just pay attention, perhaps even in our dreams. My friend and colleague Matthew Schlimm advises, if you want to find God, do not listen to the empires of this age or their propaganda. Don't assume that might makes right. Don't fall for the lie that God's power aligns with human power. Look for God in the small, in the ordinary, in the unexpected places that the world misses. Whether it's at Bethel, a manger, or a cross, God shows up. And when we are able to have that kind of awareness of God, to truly feel with every fiber of our being that God is with us, that God is preserving and sustaining us as we move about, and that God's plan is for our good and not for our destruction, we might then be moved as Jacob was to awe, awareness, and then awe. That's what happened with Jacob. That dream changed his outlook and perspective on where he was and who he was. He now knew that he was in the presence of God. He took that horrid pillow that he was sleeping on and he turned it into an altar, started an altar with it, something that could be seen and touched and affirmed to mark that an event had happened, an event had occurred in this place that was worth remembering for posterity. Maybe we need something like that sort of dream experience to nudge us to become more aware of God in the moment, in the present, and what God is doing in our lives, to stop living on autopilot based on what bad news and messages we are so often fed. It's a bad diet, worse than the lettuce. What can we do today, tomorrow, during the week to put ourselves in places where we can be moved to an awareness of God and awe at what God is doing? However we imagine God, doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. That's congregationalism. We all have our own sense of God, and that's okay. We even encourage that. What matters, though, is that however we picture in our scheme of things, however we picture God interacting with the world, we position ourselves in spaces that can activate for us awareness and awe, that we too can receive and reflect and respond to good news that will not let up, that will motivate us not to just react, but to proact in transformative ways that bless others and overcome whatever might limit us and our neighbors. The invitation is that we put ourselves in those places where we can have dreams like Jacob, either waking or sleeping, doesn't matter. But ultimately, may we each awaken to everything, to all that God is and does and brings about through us here in our truly still wonderful world. Amen.